All right, thank you.
Great, fantastic. So welcome everyone to the industry panel, the first panel of the day at our symposium. I think there might be more people coming in later on the day, so in case the room fills up, I would just encourage you to move in a little bit, but at the moment, no need for that. My name is Johanna Schiele, and I'm a student at the Harvard Kennedy School. I was involved in organizing this, and I'm really pleased to introduce the industry panel that will explore the role that industry and private businesses can play in a circular transition. And the questions that we're going to focus on today center around how far along our participants perceive the circular industry transition to be in their sectors, then what the most serious challenges are to a broader adaptation of the concept, and also maybe a bit of a harder question, how much and what role industry can even play in fostering systemic change. The format is very easy. We're going to have 5 minutes presentations from all of our participants, hopefully concise and crisp. And this is just for them to have a chance to display how their business is circular. And then we're going to have a moderated discussion followed by a Q&A. Great, so now let me introduce our panelists. We have Monica Möska, who has come all the way from Denmark. She works for the Danish Design Center, where she is a senior project manager, and she's a design anthropologist by training, meaning that she's working at the intersection between sustainable business practices, cities, and design. Then we have Michael Allegretti. He's the CSO of Rubicon Global, which is a company that is working in tech, sustainable services, and recycling. And he holds the same degree from the Kennedy School, actually, that I hopefully will have in 1 year. Then we have José Manuel Möller. He is the CEO and founder of Agramo, a company from Chile that is operating a no-waste distribution network of convenience stores. So the idea here is that you can get everyday products without having to use any type of packaging. And his company has won multiple awards over the past years, including the National Geographic Ocean Plastic Challenge. Finally, we have Michael Saltzburg. He's the Global Business Director at DuPont Biomaterials. Michael self-described on our website as a veteran of the chemicals industry, and he works on developing alternative feedstocks for products apart from petroleum and gas. He also holds a PhD in material sciences from the University of Pennsylvania. And finally, as moderator, we are very glad to have ETIENNE from the World Bank. He's a senior private sector specialist on circular economy topics at the World Bank, working mainly in developing economies such as Bangladesh, Turkey, Pakistan, or Ethiopia. And the second focus of his work is also climate readiness and climate change resilience. So that intersection is going to be really interesting to explore. Great. And we're going to start with the presentation from Rubicon.
Lucky me. Thank you so much. So it's great to be here, and as a Kennedy School student, it's awesome to be sitting here as a business leader now. There's so much you could do with that degree coming out of Harvard. So I want to use my 5 minutes to quickly introduce Rubicon so you know who the heck we are. There's a HBS case study on us, but the company has evolved a lot since that was written about 8 years ago. And tell you what I think we're facing in terms of challenges to getting towards a circular economy, and then touch at a very high level on 3 ways that our company contributes to the circular economy, with the caveat that what you're going to hear from me might not be all that groundbreaking. And that's part of the point that I want to get through to you all. So, okay, they're up there. So what is Rubicon? We're a technology company in the waste recycling and now the smart city space. And we have what I think is a very simple yet powerful mission to end waste. And that started with physical waste, keeping garbage out of landfills, and it's evolved over time to a broader mission of trying to prevent wasted time, wasted tax dollars, wasted resources. So it's really a holistic way of looking at that mission. And that's important because if we're going to achieve a circular economy, you need resources to do that. So where can you find savings to plow into those circular programs? We're certified B Corp. I don't know how many folks in the room know what that is. In this audience, you probably know. A lot of audiences I go to, they say, what the heck does that mean? So we're a social enterprise working to do well and do good. And we're the 9th largest in the world. And we're rapidly expanding. You could see some of our stats up there. But I will caveat that while we're in 22 countries, millions of service locations, the majority of our core waste and recycling business is in the United States. What we're doing abroad is more software services. So my remarks will be a little more focused domestically. So on the next slide, if you pull back to the 30,000-foot level, I like to think that Rubicon aspires to deliver a virtuous cycle of value. And I'm going to really dumb this down and say we are essentially like a trainer, a fitness trainer for businesses related to their waste and recycling. So what do I mean by that? Well, first it starts with managing the core waste and recycling services of a customer. And we do many of the world's top businesses, the coffee you drink, the phones you use, the dollar or retail stores you go to. We are behind the scenes and those are our customers. So first we have to nail the basics, getting stuff picked up and disposed of, or ideally moved into a recycling stream. Think of that as the fitness assessment, taking your weight, coming up with a kind of exercise regimen for you. But then we look like a trainer to build that company's strength and endurance. That means moving them towards waste reduction, towards zero waste. And then finally, coming full circle, we look to get them on a truly circular path, right? So less waste produced overall, ideally no waste. How can they start to reuse that thing? And to use the trainer example, that would be better eating habits, better lifestyle choices. So before I give you a quick spin through what we do, what are the challenges that I'm seeing? Well, first of all, misaligned economic incentives. The major waste companies own landfills. They make money by picking your garbage up and dumping it in the ground, particularly in the United States. It's good business for them. With that as an economic misincentive, we're not going to actually move forward. Secondly, we have a behavioral bias towards single use, and that's born largely from, at least in this country, our reliance on single-stream recycling. Single-stream recycling has made it easier for us to be a single-use throwaway nation. Thirdly, inconsistent government policy. A gentleman at the top was talking about plastic bags. What's banned in one place is legal somewhere else. What's recyclable in one place is not somewhere else. We're a patchwork, or at best a sieve, when it comes to recycling policy. It's no wonder people don't know what to do with yogurt containers. And finally, and most germane to this meeting, a lack of circular infrastructure. And from my perspective, that means really good recycling infrastructure, not single-stream recycling, but moving beyond that. China's national sword policy basically exposes the problem in the U.S. It's not the cause of the problem. This is a wake-up call to us in the U.S. and much of the developed world to get our act together. So the good news is everyone on this stage is trying to do something to contribute to some aspect of the solution. And if you move ahead on the slide, quickly you'll see what Rubicon does. I'd say we contribute in 3 key areas. One is to enable a greater understanding of waste and its flows for our customers. So we are collecting data on all the waste generated by our customers. Where is it produced? When is it produced? What's in the stream? And that helps to answer questions related to achieving circularity. Are they not able to recycle because of, say, an infrastructure issue, i.e. they don't have access to recycling, a design issue, the way the thing that they build or produce is put together, or a behavioral issue, such as contamination? Our data and analytics shed light on that. Secondly, we accelerate a feedback loop. This is important. If we're going to get to the vision that was outlined in the first presentation and get there before we're all dead, we need to move faster. And a big part of improving recycling is waste audits, something that is still done, believe it or not, with pen and paper, and people pouring garbage out on the floor to analyze it, usually with a tarp. We've developed technology that could do virtual assessments through machine learning. We've also developed technology that digitizes this process, so now you can compare hundreds and thousands of loads of garbage faster, better, and cheaper, and effectuate government policy or behavioral change more quickly. And finally, the last aspect of what we do, and this is a growing area, and these are anecdotes right now. These are not at scale, but to be a circular economy, we need them to be. We serve as a matchmaker. We find materials through our customers and end destinations that can use those materials to build new things or repurpose new things. 3 cool examples. A shipping barge from one of the world's largest parcel delivery services, we repurposed into a roaming break room for farm workers. Plastic bottles from one of Major League Soccer's leading teams, we transformed into benches for people visiting the stadium. And finally, expired milk from one of the world's largest variety store chains. We get out to farms to use as biogas to power the farm and the surrounding community. So 3 anecdotes, and now our challenge is to bring those to scale. Thank you.
Fantastic. Next is Agramo. And also you have a clicker if you want to toggle yourself.
Hello, I'm Jose from Chile, and I have 4 slides to introduce myself on what we are doing with Agramo. To give you a little bit of context why Agramo exists, while I was studying business and economics in Chile, I decided to move from my house with 3 classmates to a poor neighborhood. It was supposed to be a 6-month experience, but I spent there a year and a half until I finished my studies. And living there, I was in charge of cooking and buying everyday stuff in the mom-and-pop stores that in Chile we call them almacenes. In Latin America, each country has its own name, tienditas, bodegas, but it's everywhere. And because we didn't have enough income and we didn't have enough liquidity, I was getting the smallest packaging ever that you could even imagine in the mom-and-pop stores. Are they cheaper per unit, but per kilo are the most expensive ones. After a couple of months, I realized that I was paying around 40% more than my mother in cooking oil, rice, lentils, powder detergent. And I put a name on that it's the poverty tax. That's the reason that Agramo exists. Thousands of families, millions of families, the base of the pyramid is paying around 40% more because they don't have enough liquidity. Over that, we have another problem. They're paying more for packaging. And that packaging ends up in the same neighborhood. They're not in the high-income areas, we're in the slums. So we have a double or triple problem based on packaging and supply chain. So the aim of Agramo is to solve that problem. And how we are doing it today, we create something that we call the packaging as a wallet. So it's a packaging with an RFID chip. It's pretty simple, costs 15 cents. That's linked with an account with the app, the Agramo app that you could have. And then the dispenser are IoT connected that recognize the packaging, recognize the user, and recognize the account. So you pre-charge money in that, and you pay with the packaging. What we are trying to do is to have a solution not only for high-income vegetarians, millennial like me. We're trying to design for 90% of the people that make decisions based on price. We don't have time, so the shorter way for change a behavior is money. So how we could have a solution that is cheaper, not more expensive, and could be everywhere with the brands that you already know. That's the purpose of Agramo. So we're trying to work with global brands. Today we're working in Chile. This year we're launching here in the US. Next year we're moving into Europe. Our headquarters is going to be in Amsterdam. And what we are trying to do to make recycling obsolete. We're trying to work upstream and have no need for some products, some materials, no necessity to recycling. So how it's working today? Today we are working with Unilever in Chile. dispensing laundry detergent and dish soap. So the people, it's coming to this like a electric tuk-tuk. It's a tricycle. We have 8 of these units today. We're working to have around 40 this year just for those products in Chile. This month we are launching another tricycle for pet food with Purina from Nestle, and we are working in different projects with Coke and several brands to help them to offer their product but not their waste. Next month we're going to have the first Algramo store. You know Amazon Go? Amazon Go store is the most sexy solution for retail. Well, in April we're going to say that Amazon Go is for old people. Why is that? Because people is getting rubbish from one place to another. So what do we want to bring? Just give you the product, not the packaging. So it's going to be a store 100% self-service. You're going to be paying with the packaging and getting just the product. We're developing this to work then with retailers. Could be Amazon, could be Walmart, could be Whole Foods, who wants to work with us. The idea is to bring this solution to the market, connecting brands with the customer through retailers, offering just the product, not the waste. That's Algramo. Thank you.
Great. And next is DuPont.
Okay. Hi, I'm Michael Saltzburg. I run the biomaterials business at DuPont. Thanks. The perspective I bring is I'm a scientist that spent his career trying to develop new materials, better materials. And the last 15 years, what that's meant is trying to make materials from plant-based renewable resources rather than from petroleum or natural gas. And so in my 5 minutes, what I want to try to do is give a perspective from that very narrow view. I think everybody here is familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and their view of the circular economy. And what strikes you when you look at this diagram is how many different aspects and how complex the whole system is. And so, we've heard already two fantastic presentations about different ways of reusing or product as a service. I don't know anything about that. What I know about is the two things that are mentioned on this chart. When we look at the circular economy, materials do matter, and better materials, the way we start off the whole supply chain does make a difference. And so the two aspects I want to talk about in the 5 minutes are, number one, do we choose to put new materials into the supply chain, into the economy that are based on petroleum or natural gas extracted from the earth, or do we choose to use renewable materials that are based on carbon that came, let's say, from the atmosphere into a plant? Number one choice. Second choice is, what are we doing with these materials when we're done with them? And in the MacArthur Foundation, we're part of the CE 100. I think they're a fantastic organization. They talk about leakage. When you have leakage, when something finally reaches the end of its useful life, what is its fate? So those are the two things I want to talk about very quickly. So if we think about those two aspects, there's really two very different places where materials can help. One is, what can we do to help with climate change by minimizing the carbon that gets out in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gas emissions. And the second thing is, how do we minimize plastic in the environment? And what we'll find is the material choices that you make sometimes work for one and sometimes work for the other, but they're actually quite different. And so what I've listed here is 4 different or 5 different criteria that you can look at. Is this a good idea, yes or no? So one thing is, again, do you want to introduce renewable carbon into the atmosphere, into the system, or do you want to do non-renewable carbon? And one thing I would mention that sometimes isn't appreciated about materials is it's not just the fact that the materials you're using are made from a petroleum-based resource. It's also that the profits that get made by an oil company in refining that barrel of oil in the materials actually pays for all of the fuels that get used as well. So as an example, these numbers vary a lot. Just to give you a sense, something like 10% of the volume of a barrel of oil goes to materials, but something like 20 to 40% of the profit from that barrel of oil comes from materials. So when we make a choice about materials, we're not only choosing what we use in the material, but we're also enabling the whole petro-based economy to work. The second thing we have to think about is, how is that material made? I thought there's been some very thoughtful comments so far. Let's say we made a material from renewable resources, but we did it in a way that was completely toxic to the environment or created a lot of greenhouse gases itself. That would be an issue. The next one we look at is, can we use less material in use? And what we mean there is a lot about durability. We've heard a lot about that. So a lot of those kinds of concerns, do they help? So for example, plastic in the environment, whether you make it from renewable resources or non-renewable resources, if that plastic's in the environment, it's not helping anybody. So just as an example, you've got to really think about what's the goal you're trying to do and what materials choice do you want to make. So I'm running out of time. They're flashing things at me. So real quick, we again, very thoughtful comments so far. And I really appreciate what Jose just said. In my world, I'd love to have everybody using renewable materials, but nobody's going to use them if they don't perform as well and if they cost more. So we're constantly looking for what's that sweet spot where we can find new materials that perform better, are cheaper, and of course have much better environmental performance in all the aspects that I talked about there. So just to give you a couple of examples, I don't have time to go through all of them. We have two products that are out in the marketplace today and one that's about to be in the market today that are very different in their impact. And so I tried to rate them here against the 5 different criteria I mentioned. For example, one of them is a material that replaces propylene glycol that comes from oil, goes into hand creams and lots of other kinds of things. It's renewable, it has a much better life cycle analysis, it uses a lot less greenhouse gases, and it's biodegradable, but it doesn't really help if you look at it from the point of view, it helps with renewable carbon, but it has nothing to do with plastics pollution. So if you said to me, Mike, is this bio-PDO helping with plastics pollution? No, it really isn't, but it certainly helps a lot with renewable carbon. On the other hand, if you look at something like a product we have called Sorona, it gets used in apparel and carpets. It's 37% renewable, so it helps there. It's also much more durable, and this, I think, is a very important aspect that has come up several times today already. One important part about materials or products is, can you use them longer? Do they last longer? So one of our products, for example, can replace spandex, and one of the reasons people throw their clothes out is because the spandex doesn't work anymore. If we can have it be more durable, they can wash it more times, we can increase the life cycle of that product. And then the final one here is a product that works with PET bottles as an additive to make sure that you can use a lot less plastic to keep the same shelf life that people need. So again, it would be fantastic if we could get away from single-use plastic, but while we're going to have it and telling people they can't have their soda bottles and all that is going to be difficult to do, at least we can work to down gauge how much plastic's required for each of those solutions. So this gives you an idea of some of the things that we're doing today. So I'll stop there and didn't get in trouble.
Not yet.
There's still time for that. All right. So it's going to be exciting to see if it works. I think it will. Okay. Here we go.
Imagine if waste didn't exist. Imagine if we designed a world where all kinds of waste was considered a valuable resource, where we reused precious resources like wood, steel, and concrete. What if we could create the zero-waste world? All over the world, more and more people need places to live, work, and play. But when we build, we also create waste. Globally, over 2 billion tons of waste is generated every year. About half of this comes from construction. In 2018, the Danish Philanthropic Association, Reldania, asked innovators to bring their best ideas for turning waste into innovative solutions for the built environment.
Circular Construction Challenge har givet os muligheden for at prøve vores forretningsmodel i den virkelige verden. Vi er 3 store partnere, som er gået sammen om at skabe en ny cirkulær løsning for byggeriet. Fra starten har vi inddraget alle parter i værdikæden for sammen at designe den løsning, som vi i dag kender som Gen3.
By reducing waste and building with the waste we have, we can make the construction industry more circular. The challenge model works because it invites new players in and forges cross-sector partnerships for lasting solutions. This is a challenge that we need to solve together.
Hvis vi i Danmark byggede alle sekundære byggerier, som scorede her i genbrugsmaterialer, så ville vi faktisk spare 40.000 ton CO2 om året. Designmetoderne har hjulpet os til dels at kortlægge og dels at afprøve vores løsninger i virkeligheden. Og det er for at bryde med de normale vaner og uhensigtsmæssige processer i byggeriet i forhold til en cirkulær løsning.
Vi viser, at man ikke blot kan genanvende, man kan også dyrke fremtidens biomateriale i affald. Vi har brugt designmetoder til at inddrage brugerne undervejs. Blandt andet har vi spurgt dem, hvad de synes om overfladerne, og hvor de kunne se produkterne blive anvendt. På den her måde så kan vi helt undgå affald, og vi kan markant reducere miljøbelastningen i produktionen af byggematerialer.
Waste in construction is set to double by 2025. Let's create a new cycle. Let's build the zero waste world together.
Yes, all right. Hi, I'm Monica. I'm pleased to be here. I'm from the Danish Design Center, as introduced. I'm the head of our cities program at the Danish Design Center. And just to give you a short brief on what we're actually doing at the Danish Design Center, I just wanted to show you this video because I think pictures and words from the people participating says more than I could just introduce in a few minutes' time. So, but I'm from the Danish Design Center is the National Center of Design in Denmark. We are based in Copenhagen and in Kolding, another Danish city in Jutland. We used to say that we activate the designer's mindset and tools to actually empower businesses, industries, society and people in general in shaping the next. So that means we work with businesses, with industries, we work with public sector, both cities and government. We both work with Danish and international partners. So yes. The innovation challenge that we did here, as just introduced, was funded by the philanthropic association Real Dania, and we were the one operating and leading and designing the challenge. So why an innovation challenge, you might ask? And for us, we see that as an important tool, an important design tool to accelerate the transformation. So to get industries together, to start having that dialogue around how can we create a more circular construction sector was crucial for us. So when we started designing this challenge, this innovation challenge and the whole format, we actually started, of course, co-creating together with the industry. So we start asking all the different partners and actors within the ecosystem of construction. So involving them to say what is actually the big challenges, because we know also from a Danish context that 1/3 of all waste generated comes from the construction sector, and also 40% of the resources are used by the construction sector. But so we start asking them, so what is the problem? Why are we not working more circular? And they all started pointing, we had the scoping process, this co-creation process, and then they were saying, they all started pointing fingers at each other. So the architects saying, yeah, but we don't have the products to build with that are circular and sustainable. And the demolishers pointed fingers at the constructors, the builders and the developers, saying they don't want to pay for the time to actually tear down carefully so we can reuse the materials. So everybody pointed fingers at each other. So then we kind of got the format there given. So we actually had to focus on an innovation challenge, building on partnerships across the value chain. So that was the format and the process. So just to, I will not, unfortunately some of it was in Danish, but there was building materials from actually grown from mycelium. There was a take-back system of the timber use on construction sites, a bit like building this take-back system, the whole system around how do we get the wood to circulate instead of just getting 15,000 tons just in Denmark, go into the incineration just after 5 to 6 months use on the construction site. So there's a lot of benefits of turning the sector into a circular one. So why design? I would just end just with a few comments. I would definitely say that design can help co-create, build those important and crucial partnerships. We can, as we saw from the challenge, people start working together, and I see my time is up. I will elaborate a bit more, but the partnerships we saw, they were key, and they were also key to the acceleration that these 3 projects had.
I guess as moderator, it's now my turn to ask the tough questions. That's very efficient. I'm not used to that level of efficiency coming from the World Bank. But my name is ETIENNE KECHICHIAN. Just a brief introduction on who I am and why I'm here. I work in a department called the Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice. I think that's very important. What Michelle said was music to my ears. I have a challenge with my own colleagues trying to say that this is a competitiveness issue and an environmental problem, right, that we can solve through the private sector. My team has joined World Bank and IFC, and what I'm trying to do from the World Bank is really instill the concept of circular economy into some of the projects that we do in developing countries. So it's super difficult. What I hear here today is inspiring but super difficult. to do in the context where we have a lot of our projects. So I really want to focus the questions on what the policymaker can do to make your lives easier, to get some of the innovation out and help it scale. I think that's very important. How do we make this profitable? I think the three themes that came out of this panel, at least for me, are innovation, profitability, and holistic approach or collaboration across different streams. And I think these three things are extremely important. So maybe I can start with some brief questions about, first of all, what triggered your desire to go into this? I think that was very clear from Jose Miguel. But I want to see what triggered it. Was it a government incentive? Was it a corporate social responsibility? What kind of ignited this desire to go circular?
We kind of, for the Danish Design Center, what started this was actually, we are a bit different compared to the other companies, because we are more an institution and a center managing the innovation across sectors and across businesses and with businesses and public. So, but for us, it was actually showing how design can be a valuable asset and an enabler of actually starting the conversation and accelerating the innovation around circularity. So that was kind of our point of departure and motivation to actually show the construction sector how much co-creation and valuable strategic partnerships can actually help move the whole sector.
I guess for Rubicon, in the earliest days of the company, it's about 10 years old, we were actually just kind of focused on circular solutions. There's an example in the case study of taking a spent pizza dough from a national pizza chain and trying to repurpose that into a fuel. But what happened is the company grew rapidly, and the market wasn't really where we were 10 years ago. Circularity wasn't really a thing. We were kind of out on the edge. So now we're back focused on circularity because it's always been in our heart, but also because the market has caught up, and we can't lose sight of that. The brands with whom we work are moving towards trying to institute circularity into their processes and their products, partly for CSR reasons, partly for marketing reasons, but mainly because their consumers are starting to demand it. And that's a good thing, and we should celebrate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say from DuPont's perspective, it's a company that's always been involved for the last 200 years in developing new materials. And so they were, it was one of the companies that was part of the whole petromaterial revolution that happened in the 20th century. And I think there was a recognition in the 1980s that the next wave of innovation is going to have to come from biology approaches, and from renewable feedstocks. And so we had a sense, just like Michael was saying, that the trend was coming. Now, it took a little longer than I think maybe we all hoped for, but I think it's here now, that people would really demand to know that these materials were made in a better way from better feedstocks. And so I think that's, it was really listening to our customers. We sit all the way back in the value chain. We're making the basic materials that go all the way forward to the designers and the product makers. So I think it was listening to our customers, and then also seeing an opportunity where bringing some new tools from biology and new feedstocks from the agricultural world could help us with innovation.
In my context, to be honest, I wasn't looking to be an entrepreneur. I'm not a big fan of Steve Jobs. That's not my world. Actually, I was going to work in an NGO on a local municipality, but I realized that was a huge problem in the market. Actually, they were teaching me that was a good thing, because when they teach you about the base of the pyramid, they tell you they don't have $100, they have $1, but they're millions. So they're teaching us how we could reach that dollar, not thinking what are the externality of that. So I realized that problem, no one solving it, and it was more linked with my purpose of solving a problem. I'm not in love with the machines. I don't like detergent at all, but I love to solve a huge problem. And if this through a dispenser machine, I will do it. And I'm really purpose-driven more than tech-driven in my case.
No, thank you very much. I think I also want to get a bit more into the holistic approach, the dialogue element. How do you get partners involved? And how do you take a global picture? Because I think it was very important what was stressed here. If we do circular in the United States and Canada, does it create an imbalance in the market and you just have the base material go somewhere else? So do you actually solve the systemic issue that is associated with the material that we're extracting? And I think from that, it requires dialogue across value chains, but also within your communities. And I want to know, what were some of the biggest challenges and barriers in terms of getting the different partners involved in the discussion? DuPont, you have value chains all the way to Bangladesh, right? So we're working with you there.
Sure.
You have also very local context. So what are the barriers to that, and how did you overcome it through dialogue or through other methods? So maybe some of that.
Yeah, so I'm not a real expert. I think there's people that can speak better to the government aspect of it. But certainly for us, I'll give an example in the textile value chain. So we sell into the textile value chain, and so we sell pellets of a material that gets spun into a fiber, that gets woven into a fabric, that gets cut and sewn, and then it has to be designed by the designer at Lululemon or whatever. So that whole chain is very extended. It takes a lot of work, and I think what Monica said is really important. Getting all the folks to talk to each other and understand that the various trade-offs really matters. And so if each step is looking at how do I optimize my profit by getting the lowest cost material or taking something out of my particular step in the chain, that's okay. They have to do that. That's their business. But if we can look at it as a whole system, and a lot of times it has to be driven by the brands pushing backwards, if we can look at it as a whole system, we can make a lot more progress. Very often I've seen things get hung up where this is a better material, and from the brand's perspective, it's great, but the guy that converts it from a pellet of polymer into a fiber doesn't make enough money, and so he says, I can't do this. And so we've got to really look at the whole thing as a system and make it work for everybody in the chain.
Yeah, totally. And in construction sector, I think it's a bit more, there are a lot of vested interests, so we tried looking into this. It's very difficult, so I'd like to get your perspective on how you kind of solve that.
Yes, definitely. I would like to give you some perspectives. I'm not sure that we solved it all, but we at least have some cases showing that it is possible, and that's very valuable. So what we started with was actually looking at the existing value system and value creating system across the value chain, mapping that out in the whole partnership. So together with the developers, the contractors, demolishers, architects, designers, business developers, all around the table, mapping out how does the existing system look like at the moment? What value flows which way? So kind of having this design tool of working very visual with mapping out the system, and then getting that conversation around, could that value flowing be different? Could it look differently? Could we create other values? And if you actually had the opportunity to sell these carefully taken down materials, could that be a new business model to you as a demolisher? So we actually, for example, for the Genträ, which means translated rewood, with they actually starting to have that conversation around, so if you have to take down that wood and sort it, who would hold that expense? And could we actually, will the developer pay if it's more expensive to use reused wood, as there was also a conversation about it and from you, from the keynote, brilliant keynote. So actually they started having that big challenge from the demolishers and from the construction side saying this is going to be more expensive. And then they started mapping out and found out, no, it actually doesn't have to be more expensive, because if that cost that will actually, they usually spend on having it taken away and brought into incineration, if that's taken away and put into a more careful demolition and sorting on ground, on the construction site, it can actually equals out. You need to have that mapping out and that conversation with everybody around the table. And then actually they found out at the end that this rewood, Genträ, actually are selling the reused wood in the large retail sale at the moment, 20% less than the virgin material.
Oh, that's fantastic. Finding new value streams for different segments, I think, is a vital part of this. So, yeah, I don't know if you have anything that from your experience. And
yeah, I guess first from the policy perspective and then the investment perspective. On the policy side, there is actually good news. I said before that, at least as it pertains to recycling policy in the United States, it's kind of a sieve or a patchwork. But the good news is the trend is in the right direction. Laws are not being passed that are taking recycling the wrong way. Laws are being passed in the heartland as well as in places like Cambridge that further force us to segment our waste or ban bad materials. So that net is a good thing. And I think where policy could go to drive more circular behavior, particularly as it relates perhaps to construction, government has a role that it could play in mandating or favoring those developers or construction firms that use reused materials. That would seem to be an easier thing and lower hanging fruit to start to drive that behavior. The second driver, I mentioned the market before and how that's moved a lot of our corporate customers. Now it's Larry Fink. And, you know, if we were doing this across the river at HBS, everyone's eyes would kind of light up. I mean, when Larry Fink said about a month ago that he's pivoting his firm's investments towards those companies that are sustainable and, in essence, that are moving away from a sheerly linear model, what he was saying was towards a more circular one. And I don't think you can underestimate the power of the investment community in driving real change in corporate boardrooms.
Miguel, especially from your perspective, did you see any challenges with the waste collection systems, with the actual people that are doing this? I mean, how did you kind of do that through dialogue?
In my context, actually, we're trying to avoid waste. But the challenge that we have been facing is how to collaborate between Unilever, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, that are competitors. In the university, in the school, they have been teaching us how to compete, not how to collaborate. And today we have 10 years to solve this in collaboration, so no one's not really well how to do it. And also trying to innovate in some business that have been running for years and years, trying to show them that maybe there's another way to do it. It has been quite difficult. Actually, the approval of what we are doing in Chile came from UK after 9 months of reading a legal document. But I am pretty confident and optimistic about it's coming. I feel like a lot of people is understanding that we have 10 years and we need a really aggressive solution. But one of the main barriers, is the collaboration between competitors. And in the developing world, the public policy is not fast enough to reach the goals that we need to have. Sometimes the policies for high-income countries, but Chile is just starting with some policies, but Chile is really, really small. We need Brazil, we need Mexico and Colombia moving into this. And I'm not sure if we're gonna be on time, but one of the barriers for sure is the public policy that should push the companies to adopt different solutions.
Yeah. Great. Joanna, do you have time for one more question before we go out, or should we go out to the? Yeah. Okay, and then we can go out to the audience. Okay. Great. So my last one is quite simple, and I think it plays into the role of the policymaker, which is a bit complex in this space. You guys are, in a lot of ways, the leaders in the field where you're working. But how do you get policies in place that get the entire field up to speed on this? Because just doing it in one industry is one thing, but what I experienced we had a meeting, not I, but my team had a meeting in Pakistan yesterday where they had visited a company. I didn't even know they were doing circular economy, but they are, of course, a gem in a desert. So how do you get the entire field up, and what is the one policy that you feel that could have helped you scale faster, right?
I went first last time. You guys go first. All right. For me, it's pretty straightforward, and I think there was a very insightful question about the externality question. So the biggest issue we have on the material side is if I want to make a material from an agricultural feedstock or waste stream, the farmer grows it, somebody pays the farmer, somebody processes that. If an oil company wants to make it, they poke a hole in the ground, and they pump it up out of the ground, and so of course it's cheaper. Okay, so there's also lots of government policies that support oil companies. And so the very simplest thing that would be helpful to us is if the price of that, tragedy of the commons, the issue that these guys can pump stuff out of the ground and not pay for it, if that could be addressed. The technologies to do, for example, chemical recycling, which everybody talks about, and from my perspective as a scientist, a much better solution than mechanical recycling. Mechanical recycling is great, but it has real limitations in terms of how many times you can do it and what the value of the material that comes out the other side. Chemical recycling, we did it at DuPont at our Dacron polyester plant in the 60s and 70s. The technology absolutely exists. Nobody does it because you can't compete with virgin material that comes up out of the ground. So if you ask me one thing that would drive both recycling and biomaterials in a big way, it would be to get a reasonable price built into the virgin so that they're paying the real cost of what they do, and we can compete much more effectively with them. That would make my world a lot better.
That's
Thanks,
why
man.
you had to go first. That was a great answer.
Oh, all right.
All right, I'll go. I guess on our side, and it's a bit outlandish, but if you were to completely ban landfilling, it would force us to have a circular economy. So this isn't realistic in a U.S. context, certainly not in our lifetime. Let's be clear about that. We could have the best intentions. But so what is the on-ramp towards banning landfilling? It's zero waste goals that have teeth, that aren't aspirational. So we're actually in like the one city in America that has met its waste reduction goal and met it ahead of schedule. Is literally the only city in the United States that has done that. So if you're here in Cambridge, you know, and this is where you call home or have been for a while, you might not realize what it's like in the real world, defined as the rest of our country or the world, but it's not like this. So I guess the answer is a landfill ban, but realistically demonstrated by waste reduction goals that have real teeth and real consequences for the jurisdictions that do not meet them. And those consequences flow across the economy to both the companies and the residents, right? Because we can't just solve this with businesses reducing their waste and being more circular. We also have to do with homeowners and residents as well. So I guess that would be my answer.
That's awesome.
Also a great answer.
Thank you so much. That's very sweet.
So I would go more for because I also think for the construction sector, even though I'm not an expert, but I do have the cases to rely on. I'm not an expert in the construction sector, but more in like the design approach. So, but I would say that on that policy level, you could definitely both work on the incentives, as you also mentioned, but you could also work on setting like concrete restrictions into how many or how much virgin material are actually being used for the developers, and also within when you go in for the public sector and the public developers to actually have these demands or restrictions of how much virgin material can you use for the construction. And also I would say we have this saying at the Danish Design Center and with all our partners that we say never alone. So you could have some restrictions on how to actually work in these consortiums across sector, across the value chain, that you actually, as we had in the challenge, as a mandatory thing to team up in innovation teams with different partners, also the unusual ones. So we could kind of have some policy around working in these close partnerships, enforcing them, and actually enforcing the whole partnership model. I think from the Danish perspective, we have already from the government perspective, policy perspective, the government has to ensure our 70% climate goal in 2030. That's an ambitious government strategy, a policy. They have enforced, initiated 15 climate partnerships across industries to actually start thinking how to solve and meet that goal in 2030.
Thank you.
From my perspective, first of all, I think we need to be unpopular. That's the first thing. So maybe we're going to have some short-term consequences, but we need to be really aggressive in terms of public policy to push companies to switch. I have three ideas. One, pretty common, ban single use of packaging. That's simple. We're talking about this all the time, but no one's doing it. Secondly, carbon tax with a focus on meat, really unpopular coming from South America. We produce the meat. And also bring information about the life cycle assessment of fashion. If we need to tackle the real problems, we should talk about not only about packaging, we should talk about meat, fashion, and construction that we're doing here. So I think those are some ideas that we should be doing, being unpopular, but there's a huge role in public policy in this.
No, thank you so much. I was actually a bit surprised by that answer. I was hoping to hear more focus on innovation, more ability to absorb risks that firms are willing to take in countries, because what it means to be circular for a small company is different than a big company. And there you do need a mechanism that allows them to innovate a bit and stop their processes, change their products, go out there and get the customers, build the market. But it was interesting to hear the environmental aspect, but I would say the competitive aspect is as important or more important in the context where, at least where I work. I'm the World Bank, so I can keep asking questions, but should we go to the audience?
Let's do that. You're almost keeping me on time. So this time we actually have online questions, and we're going to ask them at the beginning. So Kezzy is going to ask questions on behalf of the online audience.
Hi, my name is KECHICHIAN. I'm going to be the proxy for the online questions. So the first question is from Shunta from OECD. For Michael from DuPont, how do you foresee the transition to circular economy and the shift of policies to secure more transparency of material content of your products? Do you see that as an opportunity in contributing to the circular economy or as a challenge, for example, on business confidentiality?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question we could talk about for a long time, but to try to give a relatively brief answer, what's really made me optimistic that we can make progress here is the change I've seen in consumer attitudes, and some of it's just generational. But when I started in this business 15 years ago, you could be a really smart marketing guy by saying, well, renewable is nice, but nobody will pay 1 penny a pound more for a renewable material. And that kind of used to be true. So it used to be that we were faced with the challenge that everything we did had to be at the per pound or per kilo basis exactly the same cost as whatever they were already buying. That's changed because consumers are really asking, where does my food come from? How is it grown? Where do my materials come from? How are they made? That's what we all need to do. And so I think that that's going to be the single biggest force that I see for the positive to make the change that the question was asking about. Brand companies like the Unilevers and P&Gs Jose's talking about, all these kind of folks listen so carefully to what their consumer is saying. And if the consumer moves from saying, I want the very cheapest product I can buy, to I want a more durable product that's made the right way, that helps us, the people that are trying to do innovation with new materials that do perform better but maybe cost a little bit more. That helps a lot. So I think that's the single biggest force that'll help us to change.
So now we take one question from the audience. Nabil, please.
Question is for Monica. So you played, or your organization played mainly the management role for this collaboration that you built across sectors that were initially very, not very friendly to each other, right? So I'm curious, what were the lessons or the insights gained on the management aspect of that? Because we all need to manage such collaboration. And if you have done it and learned something, then I think we should also learn something about it.
Yes, thank you for that question, Nabil. I think one of the main or head learnings, biggest learnings for us was how much the facilitated innovation process. So there is, of course, innovation. That's for us a key driver to drive and facilitate that innovation process as one part of the price. Just to make, they got a financial they got 130,000 euros as a prize to win as one of the winning teams. And then they also got a facilitated design and innovation process for 6 months, driven by us at the Danish Design Center, together with mentors and experts and from the field. So I think that intensive training in design methods, in design mindset, in working together in this close collaboration to facilitate that dialogue and to facilitate building up the trust between the different actors in that ecosystem. That was key to actually having three proved business models and 3 existing and long-lasting solutions today. So I guess that trust, it doesn't just come by saying, hey, now we're in a partnership. So it's actually built up over time. And I think that time invested throughout those 6 months and still continuing, that stripping down, actually showing each other those the different business model, having that conversation was an eye-opener. One of our participants said, he explained it it was kind of playing this game of strip poker, where everybody kind of took one piece at the time and got more and more naked in front of each other. And you don't do that from day one, but they're actually something that they build up over time. So to create that win-win situation, it takes time, it takes openness and transparency. That's already been talked about, and yeah, so that was one of the main learnings.
Yeah, over here.
Thanks for the great panel. My question is for Michael, but really I'd love to hear the entire panel's thoughts. Like Jose, I want to bully animal agriculture a bit. It takes almost 1,000 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. It takes thousands of pounds of feed to produce, say, 1 to 100 pounds of meat. How do we take into account very resource-intensive materials when we're analyzing how we're going to recycle or reuse them? Because I feel like the risk is that if we're repurposing these materials after they've become waste, we're giving inherently resource-intensive industries an opportunity to greenwash a bit, claim that they're circular, when at the very top of that supply chain, they're using a tremendous amount of resources.
I agree. I mean, that's, I'm looking at my notes because I had written down that there's a greater need for transparency and basically metrics and traceability on products so that we can hold greenwashing accountable. So I don't have, I want to tell you I have a ready-made answer to your question on that. My answer is what you're saying is right, and you're identifying kind of a hole in the circle that needs to be filled. And I think ESG reporting, as that goes from being a nice to have and more of a CSR activity into an investment activity, and this is a really important distinction, right? Companies that do sustainability reports because it's a marketing tool, every company does a sustainability report as a marketing tool. That's changing now. Now they're doing ESG reports because the market is demanding it, their investors are demanding it. And so this is a moment for us to ensure that what goes into these ESG reports and that we as the market and the media and the watchers ensure that what's put in those reports is real actionable data and insights. So that's the best answer I have for you, is to leverage this moment, because it is a real moment that's happening right now from Wall Street vis-a-vis this stuff.
We're going to have one more online audience question.
Hi. So we have a question from Luca Polidori from Veltha, a nonprofit based in Brussels, and it's a follow-up to the transparency question. And he would like to know from all the different industry speakers if you guys would potentially be ready to share your own data in protecting the environment through blockchain or federal learning technologies.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. I mean, we already do, for example, life cycle analyses on our materials, and we do those through a, they're verified by a third party, and it's published and all that stuff. So I think that's really important, and I think that from my perspective, we're a company that invests a lot in research, and so having the transparency and pushing a lot into that is actually to our benefit rather than a challenge for us. So for me, it's yes.
And from our side as well, we would definitely also say, yes, we are very open to share our learnings, our data, and we are doing all kinds of tools and the things that we work with a Creative Commons license, so like open by default. And also working together with the industry on open source business models. So yeah, we work very much to empower this open model and transparency in general.
Yes, from our end, and we're producing our first ESG report and therefore sustainability report later in April, and taking a real look at where we are today, what we are actually tracking, and identifying as part of that rollout what we need to do better moving forward in terms of transparency. And so, yes.
We have been doing it from the beginning as a startup. We have been sharing the data with the local government to incentivize and to push different solutions. So we have been doing it, and we're going to keep doing it. And also now we're trying to push Unilever and big companies to do some life cycle assessment of their products to show what are the impact of the product.
Fantastic. And one more from the audience at the back. And And then
Hi,
we'll have
thank
one
you
last
for-
question after that.
Okay,
so just, you know.
I'm Victoria Phillips, the Zero Waste Coordinator for the City of Boston, so thanks for being here. This was super apt. I was just at a conference on Wednesday talking with the downstream folks, the bigwigs of Casella, waste management, et cetera, and they're like, you know, we need support from the upstream. But having this conversation about industry and being a municipality that kind of sits in the middle of all of it and is kind of a voice to the consumers of how to manage their waste, also how to like reduce less. I think one part of the industry that kind of is maybe missing in this conversation is the people downstream. Like, to complete that loop, there's a need for the collection of those materials. I've been thinking, like, what are some of those barriers that we've been having? And like flexible packaging and textiles are the two that come to mind. So from the textile standpoint, I hear DuPont saying like, oh, Lululemon creating those plastics, but down in the end, City of Cambridge has a textile collection program. City of Boston's working on one. And the reality of that downstream is that the majority of that gets just sold to, you know, Goodwill or overseas or whatever, and just gets downgraded until it ends up as an end of life and ends up in a landfill or incinerated. So technically, as much as the city is working towards zero waste or your products have greater, you know, efficacy or whatever, upstream, that loop being closed is incredibly difficult. And so just from your perspectives, what responsibility does downstream industries have? What have your conversations been with them? And how do you foresee like improving that infrastructure and that breaking of silos to make sure that those everyday consumer products, you know, end up back as feedstock or something like that?
Well, just as an example, since you mentioned textiles, so spandex is a material that is used for stretch. If you put a couple % in that into a fabric that's mostly, let's say, polyester, it becomes not recyclable because it contaminates everything. If you use a different material, like one of the ones I mentioned earlier, you can get that same stretch performance, but that material is also fully compatible with the PET. So again, for that to happen, the designer has to be happy with the fabric, the consumer has to be willing to buy that fabric, and but we can make choices as consumers and therefore drive the designers of the products, who will in turn drive everybody all the way upstream to materials producers like us to make those choices to make things that are from the beginning easier to deal with. So, you know, if you have a cotton polyester t-shirt, that's nice, but those are two completely different materials, and how you deal with them, as you said, is you turn them into, first you wear them as long as you can, maybe they send them somewhere else, then they turn them up into rags, and then they throw them in the garbage. So until we make different choices, that's what's going to happen.
And that's a really good point there, because I also want to just make my final note on this, because I think coming from the design field, that the earlier in the process we apply the design and designing for circular, the more value we will actually get out of it in the end. So that starting point, like starting early in the value chain to design for both disassembly, for reuse, for upcycling, I think is really, really important to really underline the value of design here on the design process.
I guess for the city of Boston and city governments, you have a role to play as well. So I talk a lot about, you know, where the market is, but what are the drivers towards where the market is, right, and where consumer preference is. So pay as you throw, right, where we're forcing people to pay money to get rid of their garbage, that has an effect on how they consume. And I guess in a theoretical world where those textiles, right, if it were not a blended material, you'd have to pay money to get rid of. But a non-blended material, you'd be incentivized to purchase something like that, and the city might pick that up for free for you. So there's a role for government to be innovative in starting to help move the market without too heavy of a hand. But at least in a U.S. context, with the exception of a handful of cities, garbage is bundled into your taxes. You don't think a second about what it costs to get your garbage picked up, whether it's through a city fleet, or in the case of Boston, private contractors serving on behalf of the city, or in the case of about 50% of the country, independent contractors. So that's a policy issue we could tackle. We should talk about.
I have three things here. One, it's before everything, designed based on life cycle assessment of the products that you are producing. Secondly, the user is the one who is purchasing that product. It's not coming from wherever, someone is purchasing that. So we need to use it enough information to make the right decision. And based on that information, we should have some policy on taxation based on if recyclable or not, what are the consequences of that product at the end of the life of that product. That I think should help.
I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the challenges of doing this in a lot of the countries. Again, example in Bangladesh, we've had a program called Partnership for Cleaner Textiles, and here we're working with the producers to lower the use of resources. We're working with zero hazardous waste and the chemicals that are being used. We're trying to change the mindset, but it's such a complex system that needs to be dealt with at the value chain, at the country level, at the at the firm level. And you have some innovators in Bangladesh, but in general, you also have to get designers to think about the wash they're putting into their clothes. So all these different aspects have to come together to formulate a solution in the textile industry. And as soon as you start manipulating one set of the companies, the front runners, the others are going to find a different market to kind of use those textiles to sell it to another location. So it really needs a holistic approach. And just to say how difficult, we do a lot of work in industrial symbiosis, and I always say to use the example of my clients of Korea, right? And I say Korea took about 5 years to do their first industrial symbiosis case, and they are advanced. And the level of trust came up a lot. I would have to say trust is everything. You know, when you start creating partnerships, stripping down to the basics, getting them to really think about a solution is one of the most fundamental aspects of what we try to do, or others are trying to do, I think. So.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have to cut it off here because we're 5 minutes over time. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and for your insights. And we're going to have a break now and be back in the room by 11:30, and there's refreshments outside.
On the reserve seats. Actually, we don't need those, right?
Because they're going to come straight from break. So I told them we're meeting in the lobby, and I'm going to walk them straight to the stage. Is that okay?
That's totally fine.
Does the order matter?
It would be good to have like it arranged according to the picture. I mean, that's just a very small thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, it seems like everything's going well.
Yeah, everything's like on time as well, which is
good.
Yeah.
For the water, for the panelists, are there new cups?
Oh yes, yeah.
We'll get it from outside. Who's your tech team?
Who's your policy panel?
I didn't really like. I guess Mitsui.
Mitsui.
Good morning. 2, testing the stream. Hey, hey. One, two, three.